Hello and welcome to another episode of the World Class Real Estate Podcast. My name is Mark Wall. I'm joined by Mr. Ian Macbeth. How are you, pal?
I'm good. Yeah, all good. Start of the year fairly strong. Well, we're going to find out if it has. It feels strong. Paul on the episode today is going to share the factual information of whether it started strong, but it feels good. It feels like pipelines are in a good place. Buyer activity strong. Had some great meetings with some of the agents across the board. Caught up with quite a few industry agents actually this year outside of kind of what I do. And generally the theme for the good agents is pretty positive at the moment. So yeah, right into the thick of running, training. Kids have been ill, which limits sleep a little bit, but we kind of juggle around that. But overall, I'd say my free kind of trilogy that I work to, ticking some boxes. What about you?
Yeah, I had to chat with my business coach yesterday. It's probably had a bit of a disrupted start to the year. We're on the house move process, hoping to complete in a couple of weeks. I've been ill as well. A couple of team members have been ill. So we've had a bit of a disrupted start, although still pretty strong on instructions, not so strong on sales. But I think because of where we've taken the business, my expectations have risen a little bit as well. So what was a good year, a good week previously now is just the new normal. So it's about trying to adjust the mindset to that. So a little bit of a probably sluggish start to the year, but I think we are seeing quite a lot of positivity from buyers, from sellers. There is the stamp duty conversation, although, the timing on that is, now run out probably. But I think that's created quite a positive market to start the year. I think it just, from a mindset perspective, for me, there's been a few distractions and what have you. But I'm looking forward to getting Paul on to have a conversation about data. And he really knows his stuff, and it is so, the data that he looks at is so not only agent specific but useful in terms of agents actually having the data to be able to apply to the businesses.
Yeah. We've been using 20EA now for, I don't know, maybe 18 months. And I must admit, I love the software. I've self-confessed data geek, mentioned it before, but also how to translate it into the public's eyes rather than just to kind of look at it and read it. I've really worked on how to translate it into the public eyes. And we did an episode, I think, didn't we, where we kind of looked at the Rightmove stats and all of the pie charts and then how to translate it locally. But I just love Paul's software because it gives you all of the different metrics in comparisons. And I'm really excited to ask him a couple of key questions about trends, advice for estate agents, what you should be really telling the public and how to tell them. It's right up my alley in terms of this sort of stuff. So yeah, Paul's a really good guy as well. And they do a podcast themselves. They do a really good video podcast. I think they do it once a month where they kind of give a real good summary of what's going on with the market too. So he's worth a follow, but we've got, I think, 4 or 5 great questions that we've actually prepared for this one to make sure that we get the right information on the show. So should we get Paul on, get stuck in?
Yeah, let's do it. Paul, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Ian. Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to a bit of a deep dive on data or data we were talking about off air. Sam's not with us, so we'll stay English and have a bit of a conversation about data, eh?
Yeah, let's do that.
So we'll start the podcast as we start every episode, Paul, and it's with the question, the title of the podcast: what does world-class real estate look like to you in 2025?
So, I mean, I'm biased, obviously, but I think for me, it's utilizing the data to benefit your clients and educate your clients so they can make the best informed decisions they can when it comes to their home purchase or their home sale. You don't have to get data from us. There's so many sources of data out there now. And I think the situation you don't want to get in as an estate agent is where your client actually knows more about the market or their property than you do, because there is a danger that can happen with switched on kind of purchasers or vendors now. So you need to utilize all the resources available to you to kind of wow, impress, and be that trusted agent.
Can I jump straight in? And then if you were talking about utilizing data to benefit your clients, what are some of the best ways that you've seen agents utilizing data that really benefits their clients then?
Yeah. So first of all, if you are an agent that is actually using data when you're speaking to clients, you're probably in the top quarter of agents, because actually a lot of agents don't necessarily use it. So straight away, you're probably standing out slightly. And when I'm talking about data, I'm not talking about just kind of right move comparables, which kind of every agent does. What I'm talking really is what's happening in your local market, and local is the key word there. So we obviously, as a business, at TwentyEA, we produce lots of national and regional stats because we can't possibly report on every village and town in the country. But to an extent, they're irrelevant. What you need to be is an actual expert in your locality. Now, whether that be a town, a village, a subsector of that, you need to understand how many instructions there are kind of week to week, month to month, how many sales, what exchanges, what's happening with prices. And you can do this live. Like you don't need to wait for land registry completion figures, which are horrendously out of date and lagged. There's resources there that you can kind of do this live. And yes, it's probably a bit of extra work to do this. But if you know your market inside out and can advise that and portray that when you're speaking to all your clients, I mean, it's not rocket science. That then builds that trust with that client, and in my opinion, they're more likely to use you.
If you had the postcode, which obviously everyone does, and then you know the metrics, which everyone knows now. So you could say, in this postcode, the average 4-bed with a double garage, for example, sells at X. It takes this amount of time to transact or to go under offer and then to complete. And it's likely to get this amount of negotiation below the asking price. You can pretty much forecast for the client, just with those kind of 3 simple calculations, what the average move looks like, to give them more of an informed decision rather than the old, kind of rough guess or sales pitch. That's the open part of it that we have to remember, is evaluation is to help the homeowner plan their move and price their move, whereas obviously as estate agents, typically we see it as a sales pitch and the opportunity to win business. So it's trying not to muddy the water between the two, but that simple calculation is really, really gold for a seller. But you don't often hear an estate agent go through those metrics, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I'm kind of starting with the kind of one. We're assuming you've kind of got the client, you're speaking to that client in terms of using data, which is great. Actually, there's a stage before that, which is probably even more important, which is how do you attract people that are thinking of moving to contact you in the first place, and the range evaluation. And that's arguably the most important bit. And this is actually where you're using your kind of the data and the expertise to provide market updates across variety channels, whether that be across your social media, whether you're doing direct mail, leafleting, local kind of groups that you're aware of. And actually, why that's so important is we track every listing that comes to market across the UK. Now, 80% of listings that come to market are what we deem off market, so they weren't previously on the market, which sounds kind of obvious. But the other 20% are listings that switch from another agent, so agent A to agent B, or become a multi-listing, which is more prevalent in London really than outside. So actually, you kind of got that 80-20 rule. 80% of instructions are people that aren't currently in the market. So if there's 30 agents in your town, how are you going to capture their attention? Mm-hmm. And what we find is, and we're perhaps guilty of this as a company because we provide a solution for this, a lot of agents spend 80% of their budget touting other properties already on the market, which there is a market for that. And if you do it well and you've got a good brand and you do it right, you can win a lot of business doing that. I'm not saying don't do it, but actually it's a tiny part of what comes to the market. In my opinion, you should flip that on its head and actually spend most of your budget trying to attract the 80% of people that aren't currently on the market so that when they only think of you, and it's almost like an uncontended instruction, because already know they want to use you. So, and there's lots of ways to do that. But again, in my opinion, if you are the only agent that's using data and the really good market updates and what's happening in the market, again, you're more likely to attract those people.
Mark, do you remember we actually had this conversation, didn't we, around touting on the show? Because I think Chris Watkins had posted a 20EA statistic about the amount of properties that complete with the second agent versus the first agent. I'm pretty sure it was your stat, Paul, that you'd put out, and then Chris jumped on it, and it built some industry traction because people were kind of horrified about the amount of time and energy they put into touting for business to the amount of bang for buck that you get. And I shared it in the avocado group as well, and people were horrified about it. And it is an average stat. It's not for the best agents, but
and what I got challenged on this a lot. He just go, well, that's rubbish. That's not true. I was like, it is true. We treat like the numbers don't like, but again, it's a national average. The reason that's skewed is a lot of agents don't do any touting, so they're going to win 0% of their business for switch agents. Whereas a really good market leading agent who's got a very good process and actually doing nice messaging and switch on, they're going to be winning a lot more than that, kind of 10% of that business. So yeah, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying actually you should be concentrating more on that, because longer term, the stuff that's not on the market is going to be the way you can really grow as a business if you attract more of that.
Yeah. The classic 80-20 rule, isn't it? That we see so many times in different aspects of our lives. The hyperlocal data, how many times have, as agents, sat in a living room and somebody's read the Sunday Times or the Daily Mail, whatever they're reading on the property market, and they roll out these national stats. So the hyperlocal data that you talk about, Ian talks about this in a lot of his videos, making it really applicable to your area. So the best agents are doing that and then building the trust. And it also, we have access to data that they don't. So the fact that they're reading the newspaper, all of those stats, or the majority of stats that clients will refer to, will be national stats, presumably, whereas we have the ability to turn those national stats local and actually really build, know, like, and trust through doing that. That's what you're saying, isn't it? You use the data that applies just to your area, because actually, and obviously, that's the most important to your client.
Yeah, exactly. But and to perhaps take it one step further, because the client's probably reading national kind of headlines in the papers or wherever they're reading their news, you can still relate it to that. So I would be talking about obviously the key national topics, which would be things like we've had 2 interest cuts towards the end of the year. What effect has that had? That's a national thing, but what has that done to locally? We've got the stamp duty changes coming into effect 1st of April. That's a national thing, but actually, what's that done to the demand locally in the village? So actually, you can kind of still keep those national views and what probably the client knows, but actually relate that to local. And then actually, that's, for me, in my eyes, not many agents are going to be doing that well, I don't think. So you really stand out.
Yeah. I can't remember who said it to me. I've got a feeling it was Amy Shields said it to me, or not to me, actually. I think she was doing some sort of training session where she was previously. She said better data means better decisions. And that was kind of the summary for me that I took from it. I was like, actually, if we can put our content and our marketing out there in a really strong message with factual data to back it, there's an authority statement there, but also helps the client make a better decision. And it goes back to living rooms. It goes back to the offer negotiation stage. It goes back to exchange if there's a problem right at the back end. If you kind of use the data in the right narrative, it helps the client make a better decision for them, which is great. Talking 2025, and you mentioned a couple of the milestones that are coming. We're the best part of a month into the year now, and we can probably just about look at the land registry stats for like 2021, I would have thought. So using 20EA's data, what's like the last sort of 30 days look like for the market in a kind of general way?
Yeah. So you're right. We're just on 4 weeks into the year. So there's kind of we've got our own data. The land register data we haven't really got yet. But if I perhaps start with a summary of 2024, just kind of see how that kind of finished off, and then probably lead into 2025. So again, we're still waiting for a little bit of data, but we're going to finish on about 1.1 million completed transactions, which represents probably 8-9% up on 2023. So a lot better year than 2023, but still, not increased. Definitely lots of more increased activity, but still not an amazing year, I would say.
An average year, Paul, for context for people, is about 1.2.
1.2, I think, would be, if you look across the last 10, 15 years, if you're hitting 1.2, that's probably what we'd say is a good kind of average year. So we are below that still, but I'm a bit more bullish for next year, even though some people aren't, but let's get to that. So transaction-wise, it was a big improvement on 2023, but in terms of activity, it was a lot better. So instructions were up across the year about 9%. So there's lots more stock coming to the market. Sale agrees, which is our measure of demand, because that's kind of what people want to buy, that was up kind of 18%. So there's a lot more sales going through now in kind of Q4 and leading to Q1 than there was at the same time a year ago, because we still had, we started last year really slowly from a kind of completion point of view, because we had those interest rate rises and cost of living pressures, and it was a really slow start to Q1, which is why transactions have gone up 8%, but it skewed a bit because the second half of the year they've really risen. So prices, even though people thought prices would drop in some cases, prices still creeped up probably 2 or 3% last year. So it was all in all, it was a decent year. But we're quite bullish going into 2025 because we think that transaction growth will continue. As I say, because there's all those sale agreeds going through, you can kind of predict that there's going to be a lot more transactions than money in the bank for most agents in Q1. And I had a look at the data yesterday actually for 2025. I don't really have completion data yet, but in terms of instructions coming to the market, that's fairly static. It's similar to January last year. What is higher though is sale agreeds again. So sale agreeds are about nearly 10% up in the first 4 weeks in January. So there's still a lot of demand and people agreeing sales at the start of this year. Now, you're the estate agency, you might know better than me, but I suspect this people wanting to kind of agree a sale and complete before the stamp duty deadline on 1st of April. So there's kind of people hurriedly trying to sell and get that through before that. And the bad news for these people, as we probably all know, is that the average time from sale agreed to completion is 4 months. So if you're agreeing a sale today, the vast majority of people aren't going to hit that deadline.
I saw Paul.
You had to be agreeing kind of sales in kind of October, November to be doing that. So, but that's again an education piece. The general public, and I've got a live example. My sister-in-law, even though she agreed a sale a couple of weeks ago, so she's convinced she'll complete in February. I was like, you won't. She's like, yes, well, there's no problem. There's no problems. And already, sorry, it's probably 3 weeks ago, and already she's no progress in 3 weeks. Not had the searches back. Can't hear from the conveyancer, and it's kind of that story we know happens, but they just so yeah. So I think, but as an overview 2025, we tend not, as a business, we don't tend to make these kind of lavish predictions because it could all change in a heartbeat. But yeah, I think from my point of view, I would hope we'd get to that £1.2 million mark, because we're going to start the year a lot stronger. And I still think the market's pretty good. But I mean, Ian, you're kind of closer to the ground than me, probably. What would you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, my view this year, I think inevitably, since that stamp duty holiday, you remember the 15 grand holiday that we had a few years back, incrementally each year we would see the transactions creep back up, because we saw like 1.55 or something million, and then the next year it was like just under a million, or maybe hit a million. I think it was 9 something. And then each year you kind of anticipate that over the next sort of 3 to 4 years that would just sort of level back out, which is pretty much what it's done, because people moved their plans forward 3 years to capitalize on that saving. And I think this year is last year was nearly there, and this year will kind of, in a normal world, kind of just be the norm. I think for estate agents, what's good is typically estate agents make their profit in Q4 and they don't make any money in Q1. They break even in Q2. They make a bit of money in Q3, and you kind of can see that sort of stepstone measure. This year, I think it'll be different. And as you said with the data there, I think we're going to make some serious profit in March and April because of the stamp duty, because of the drive for people to do it, and because people have taken massive pipelines into the new year. What I can't forecast, and if I'm looking at it positively and negatively, I'd have two different views. But negatively, I'm wondering whether the summer lull is brought forward to April and May this year as a kind of like almost we hit that speed bump, we get through it, and then everyone just sort of relaxes after the stamp duty holiday.
We do find, like with previous stamp duty kind of changes and deadlines like this, you do pretty much always see a big spike beforehand, and then it kind of drops significantly for weeks after, and it almost sometimes levels itself out because you get that lull earlier. So I think you're right.
Well, I think there's two opportunities. I think we'll still see chains. We'll still see families upsizing, still see moving. It's the first-time buyers that it's going to whack in the face because most of them won't realise it because they're not looking at it at the moment. So it's the bottom of the chain where there could be a buy-to-let surge. There could be investors coming in and picking up the bottom of the chains. There's an opportunity for estate agents to educate landlords that want to grow their portfolio and businesses that want to leverage some of their profits into property there. But I don't know. I do think it will be not a normal market this year. I think it will just be an upside down market this year. It's kind of going to look different on the P&L sheet, really, is my anticipation.
Interestingly, do you know what impacted the market in 2024 the most in a negative way? Have a guess.
I would imagine it was probably
the budget, pre-budget.
No, it was the Euros.
Oh,
the Euro 2024. So there's a load of key events. So we looked at the announcement of the general election, the budget, whole host of stuff, and like compared the level of demand to like what the normal level of demand is. And actually, the kind of 4 or 5 week period where England win the Euros, the demand just kind of falls. And actually, that impacted the market the most.
Shelf rate. Modern generation.
Which was a bit annoying because we weren't even that good. We were just kind of going, everyone hated it anyway. It wasn't like we didn't win it. But and then the most positive by far impacts to the market were the two stamp duty, the two interest rate cuts.
Yeah.
So interest rate cut one, which is August time, I think, demand kind of increased by about 10% compared to norms. And then the second cut towards the end of the year was 17-18%. So interest rate cuts massively impact the public kind of psyche. So even though it's 0.25%, it probably didn't impact mortgage rates that much, but actually it makes people, that kind of kickstarts people into decision. And stuff like the Euros just goes, I can't be bothered to go on the viewing or do that, and it gets underway and things. So it's quite interesting. And actually, yes, what we found was like the announcement of the election didn't actually, that didn't really change much. Actually, demand still grew a bit I think that was a little bit because people kind of knew Labour were going to win. The budget, did spook people a little bit beforehand because there's lots of rumours going on. But then actually after, it did affect it slightly, but again, not to the extent the Euros did. So it's just really interesting to see what actually affects people, and argue the Euros shouldn't matter at all in terms of doing property, but it does budget.
I'm really surprised by that, and that's year on year, presumably.
Yeah, what we did is looked at those shocks and kind of measured it back to the norm, which we looked at. I think 2016 to 2019, we took the average and kind of compared to that. So that's kind of the logic we used, I think. But yeah, it was an interesting one.
That's a big statistic though, Mark. I mean, that's crazy for estate agents to use that we saw 0.25% drop on the base rate. Excuse me, one had a 10% uplift in demand and one had a 17%, did you say?
Yeah.
I mean, that is That's phenomenal, because the next one that comes, which inevitably will happen this year at some point, that's a really powerful statistic to, put your blogs out and put your newsletters out. And for the ones that are out there that are kind of, driving petrol cars and not using proper phones, leaflet drop, you can leaflet drop that statistic if you're out there doing that sort of stuff. That's a powerful stat, really, that it has that much of an impact. Even if the banks don't move, demand does. That's
So the second one, the banks didn't move really, did they?
Yeah, exactly. But it's still people.
It's headline. That's a headline.
Some went up. Some rates went up.
Yeah, I'm really shocked by that. Was there a bit of pent up demand after the budget?
Yeah, I think possibly. Yeah. I'd have to. Obviously, I kind of get this data and kind of interpret myself. So I don't have all the answers. I'm not an economist. Well, I actually did do economics at a degree, but I wouldn't call myself an economist. But yeah, I can't explain it fully. But yeah, there probably is a bit of that. Yeah.
Is there any like hotspots that you see around the country over those kind of reviews and stats that you've been looking at? We're talking sort of national average here, but is there any areas that are anomalies to the data? Is there anywhere? London is obviously its own micro market, but it takes up the average. I know some of the stats that you guys share, you do with and without London, which is always quite interesting. But is there any anomalies outside of London that kind of stand out and you go, that's a bit weird, what's going on there?
Yeah, so we kind of look at we look at this kind of by major cities and also by regions. So city-wise, the areas that like the highest demand areas and the places that grew the most or are growing the most are, I think from memory, were like Southampton, Peterborough, Nottingham, Bristol. So if you're an agent in those kind of cities, they were growing kind of even higher than kind of the rest of the country. The only city that really had less than 10% growth was Glasgow, I think, but it still had growth. So, I mean, it was across the board, really, some to a more higher extent than others. In terms of like regions, it's kind of east of England, so kind of East Anglia, East Midlands, Northwest. They were the kind of highest kind of growing areas. But again, it was fair. There weren't. Once you go to probably town level, there's probably bigger anomalies, which I don't necessarily have the data off the top of my head, but yeah, it was kind of across the board in general, actually. So it's just a fairly solid year all around.
Yeah. It's normally an impact of where the council are putting their funds effectively. If you see a sort of major investment from the council into a particular city or town, it's often a good place to go and invest because you see those spikes. But those four that you mentioned there kind of strike me as not student towns, but kind of younger locations. Maybe not Peterborough, but Southampton, Nottingham, Bristol. It's kind of a bit more trendy, sort of young, like they were quite cheap, and now they're kind of seen to be a sort of heartbeat of a first-time buyer and a rental sort of market type area. So I wonder if that has an impact on things. But no, it's always interesting to hear. Mark, you were going to say something.
I was just going to talk about the growth markets, really. If in terms of price points, is there any parts of the market that the data suggests? Right, we talked about on the episode where we did 7 episodes in 7 days last week. We talked about knowing the data to see which are the growth markets in your area, and is there any particular information that you've got on specific growth parts? I know it's going to be national, but is there any particular parts of the market that you think are set to maybe buck the average?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have specific kind of areas go right. This is a real real growth area. You should invest there. But I mean, I've got a bit on so property types. So houses are much more in demand than flats. So there's been a real I think detached houses are there's 12-13% more demand for those, and semi-detached 8-9%. So we're seeing a lot more kind of demand for the detached and semi-detached houses. yeah, we definitely will have the data. I perhaps just haven't got it to hand in my head.
The black thing is that post-COVID generally is that an impact of people not wanting to live in flats in that sort of, if that situation ever arises again?
Yeah, I think there's probably a bit of that.
Leaseholds as well.
Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of it's leasehold. There's perhaps people just want a garden. There's probably the culture of working from, a lot more people work from home now.
Yeah,
and actually, if you work from home, you might not want to be stuck in a flat with no garden in the summer. Not that everyone's working in the garden, but there's probably a bit of that, I think, where it's perhaps lost its appeal slightly. But yeah, it's I don't know what you're thinking.
Well, the other thing that I was interested about was price reductions, because that was a big talking point for you on socials, Paul. Kind of following you on LinkedIn, you're talking a lot about the price reduction element of things, and that was a very different year last year to what we'd seen, kind of post-COVID, if you like. What have you got in terms of, from your point of view, a little bit last year, and maybe thoughts just in general as the data sort of leads you to clues this year? But price reductions was a big kind of thing that was interesting in 2024's numbers, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think I can't remember the exact number, but I think we had more price reductions last year than any other year we've on record. And I think a lot of that was, again, the first kind of first half of the year. There was a lot of overpriced stock, which was kind of unrealistically put on the market, and it was just going to get stuck there, and you had to reduce, and actually that the gap between asking price and completion price was kind of huge. And actually, as the year went on, that line kind of got closer and closer. And actually, on the price achieved across the year for sold prices actually ended up on about 97% of asking price. So actually, by the end of the year, it actually got improved a lot. But there was a huge amount of price reductions, and the reason, and what we've done quite a lot of work this year into looking at price reductions. Basically, a property with a price reduction is less likely to sell. And this is another stat I talk about, where agents go, "No, do you mean more likely to sell? Because if I reduce the price, it's better price." I was like, no, less likely to sell. And the data shows that if you get a property priced correctly the first time, it doesn't need a price reduction, it is more likely to go on to complete than a property that is overpriced, stays on the market, reduced once, twice. It's less likely to sell. And if you do sell it, even with a price reduction, it's going to take longer. You actually, a property that doesn't have a price reduction sells 10-15% quicker than one that does. So, again, the data shows that, and again, this is something that's been preached before I came into the industry. If you price property correctly, that's the best kind of result. You're going to achieve a better price, sell quicker, and actually sell it. And that does show. Whereas a lot of agents still think, "Oh no, I'll get it on, win the instruction, and just reduce it." And obviously that will work. I'm not saying that doesn't work, but actually, if you take an average, it's less likely to work.
It completely dispels the myth of anybody, agent or client in the industry, who says, "Oh, can we bring it down, can't we?"
Yeah, it's the whole old school style of get it on, get it down, get it sold. It's not the way to do it. I mean, we had Neil come on the podcast, and kind of these guys that are the sort of top avocado agents, their data looking at 20EA, is the ratio of what they sell properties at, because they are so bullish with the pricing, because they're self-employed, they have to be so efficient. They don't care about board presence. They're not driving around with a dictaphone counting boards. They care about profit. And as a result, that means they will sit in the living room and they will show them through the diary, through the inquiries, if you price this right, it will sell, and we can get you over asking price. If the demand is right, it is achievable in that way, but it will go through and it will do the job that you want. And still, the statistic for me, Paul, that having access to the national data through your software, last year, I think the total number was like 51 to 49, something bonkers like that. The amount of properties that listed to what actually went through. There was, nearly 1 in 2 didn't actually go on to complete, which means half the amount of people that wanted to move kind of had their dreams crushed, if you like. So getting it right.
It's a coin toss when you list a property, whether it'll sell or not. Again, which is nuts.
Yeah.
It's so inefficient if you think of it. But yeah,
if there was
just on price reductions, did you see that? Did you see that property in Regent's Park? I think it's called the White House that had £114 million price reduction and sold.
no,
I think it was the second most expensive property of all time, but they had to reduce it by 114 million to sell it. So that's going to skew some of our price figures, I think.
Yeah, just a bit.
It's crazy. Some of those we had one round by me that kind of got laughed around on socials where, I don't know, it's worth about 675 and an agent had put it on for £1,050,000 and it was just like, what is going on? Anyway, with the data and because you're sat in your software, you're sat on the outside, you're not an agent, but you're working with agents, you're supporting agents. What would be the advice that you would give them in 2025, knowing what you're able to see? Slightly different to what world-class real estate may look like to you, but what advice would you give to agents kind of this year without necessarily just plugging data, but just more from looking at the trends? What do you think, if you were starting your own estate agency and you went, right, I'm going into business with Ian and Mark, what would you be saying to us on the front line to go out as agents in that business that you can read from the data?
Yeah. So I think from my point of view, everyone is interested in what's happening. The kind of everyone's interested in kind of property prices and what's happening in the market, even if they're not selling. So it's really getting a grip of that, and I would just be providing lots of market updates. And what's happening, and not in a salesy way. So not even asking for necessarily for, if you want a valuation, call me here. Just, oh, hi, I'm Paul. I've just opened up. Just thought you might be interested to know what's happened to property prices in Bracknell in the last 5 years. Here you go. Oh, that's interesting. And you can kind of mix it up, and then the next communication might be kind of what's happened to the number of listings coming on, or the rental market, which probably wouldn't be very healthy, but just really educational stuff. And I guarantee, just by doing that and not even like asking for business, the business will come to you. You'll attract people. The other thing I'd do if I was a kind of established agent is really it's kind of what we talked about at the beginning, really get to grips with my own stats versus the average. And I don't mean market share. I am the number one agent, blah, blah, blah. It's more around what's your sales conversion. So if I list 100 properties, how many am I actually kind of selling? And if I'm selling 85% and the average in my town 60%, and you can demonstrate that coherently, you go, do you want to sell your property, Mr. and Mrs. Smith? Yes. Okay, well, you're more likely to sell it with me, and I can prove it here. What price are you actually achieving? So, yeah, I'm achieving 101% of asking price. Your property's worth £500,000, so that equates to £5,000, whatever the figure is. My maths probably off there, but actually, kind of say, and actually, some of our competitors are achieving 95% of asking price. So actually, they get you 20 grand less than I would. So actually, my higher fees are relevant because I'm going to get it and have it, and really getting into grips with the numbers. How long does it sell? I agree a buyer in 50 days, and I complete on 100 in 90 days versus the average. And actually, really understanding those numbers, because I think people care about that, because you're basically saying, I can get you sold, I can get you the best price, I can move you quicker than anyone else. That, to me, is what I'd want to hear, as opposed to, I'm the biggest, I've been here 57 years, I'm the most experienced traditional agent, that's why you should use me, because I list the most properties. Oh yeah, well, you probably can't service me very well then if you've got 200 properties on your books. That's what I would be doing, and I know lots of agents do that, but it's really doing it with the data, and yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, great advice. And it's something that I think for us, with looking at self-employed or the independent, the kind of the high street heartbeat agent that's really in the community, that's just got the one branch, but they're really strong in the community, or the self-employed agent. When we compete with the online and the corporates, when you look at those kind of more localized people, having that data now available that wasn't there before, so powerful for those sort of conversations, because it does show exactly that. And in fact, I was over at my mum's house, and my stepdad said that one of his rowing friends had one of the avocado team out, but they decided to go with a different agent because we were too expensive. And I kind of asked the question then of what had happened with the sale, and I still on the market. I think he might have just reduced the price. And I said, well, it depends on the context of expensive, because yes, they might have been 0.3% more, 1,800 quid, but he's already dropped it 20 grand. And these guys get on average £27,000 more than the local agent. So, and then he kind of went, oh.
I'd love to have been a fly on that wall.
Yeah, I mean, it was my stepdad, but he's very logical thinking. So he understood what I was saying. He said, oh, I'll let him know. And yeah, I would imagine that will come back, but it's the net expense, isn't it? Rather than headline expense. And that's what we as educators and estate agents have to push. What you just said, they're out there without selling it, just highlighting it, because people don't think that way. It's funny you mentioned about the stamp duty threshold. Someone in a Facebook group, I think it was last week, was asking for a solicitor recommendation to try, it was obviously a first time buyer, to try and get a sale through before the stamp duty change, but they wanted to use the cheapest, best solicitor. It's like, doesn't work that way.
Not oxymoron.
yeah, it just doesn't work that way. Patience O'Neill are not going to do the job. Anyway, I didn't do it.
That is a really good way of taking that data to really give yourself some USPs. As agents, I think a lot of agents struggle to, and there's we're open 7 days a week. It's not a USP. These are tangible points of data that actually make a difference to a client. And as Ian said, with the unfortunate example of a family member, but people don't see that. So actually, if you put it down in front of them and can demonstrate that has a big goes a long way to making you stand out as an agent. And that is, to go back to your first question, that would be utilizing data to demonstrate how it will benefit the clients, and that's ultimately a massive step toward being world class as an agent, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Some great information there, some great stats as well, some actual facts, and some great advice for agents to kind of push their needle, their marketing plan, their strategy going into this year to really kind of think about. So I'm really pleased we've got you on in January, because I think it's a really good time to kind of have that conversation. So yeah, appreciate it. How are Derby doing this season, Paul?
Oh, we're languishing in the relegation zone. 6 losses in a row. Dreadful.
I've jinxed them.
You've jinxed them ever since you turned up to that match. We've been on a downward spiral.
Mind you, Mark's boys, Everton, seem to be on the upwards. So
in Moyes we trust.
Yeah. Derby and Chelsea not so good. Everton for the win. No, thank you, Paul. Great episode, and we'll obviously share in the show notes places to follow. But I would say, if you are an estate agent, give Paul a follow on LinkedIn. It's where he does his best stuff. Loads of great podcasts to share, great statistics, some infographics as well. So definitely worth, if you're in the industry, giving Paul a follow on LinkedIn.
Great. Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me.
A massive thank you once again to Paul Jamieson from 20EA for joining us today. What I really liked about the chat, Ian, is how focused it was on agents and how applicable. You can see, with particularly what he was saying at the start, and then looking at the data of comparing your data to the national averages or to your local averages, you can really see how useful that would be when you're sat in the living room, which is so important in our job, isn't it?
Yeah, and we mentioned it before, but everything that we can do to build trust in our local market with our potential future clients is a win, because we're always on the back foot as agents, like recruiters are, and all different industries that are in that kind of top 10 of kind of lack of trust or low respect. And the more we can do to build trust in our marketplace by giving people good quality data, factual evidence, case studies, sharing, educating.
Yeah.
The more we can do that as agents, that's not just, there's a time for an opinion and there's time for facts, isn't there? And if you're trying to explain to a marketplace or explain to a client something that maybe is conflicting to their belief, it can't be opinion versus opinion at that stage. You have to have the data to support it. And that I think is something that us as estate agents, we now have the resources, the tech, the data, the ability to do that when we use it correctly. And it means you don't get into that kind of awkward spat of opinions in the living room or on socials or wherever it may be. So that's kind of my big review of the data aspect of things, is using it for that.
Yeah, and a lot of people talk about product and market knowledge being one of the key aspects as an agent for when they are saying what do we need to be a good agent. One is market knowledge. Well, that market knowledge now is in a lot of these data points. Obviously it's knowing what's on the market and the general pricing for the area, but actually knowing what those differential points for your business and knowing what the averages for your area are, that all goes with it. And people can't be expected to know all of this off the top of their head, but if they've got the resource to be able to go and find it or have it in some form that they can glance at it and then demonstrate it to a client, those are the things that will really make you stand out as a good agent.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I know because I've got access to it, and obviously I use it, but I know just as a single statistic that's ingrained in my head for 2024, the national average estate agent listing to sale agreed versus avocado, we are 21% better than the average. So I know that if I talk to anyone, I can say, well, if you use an avocado agent, on average, we're 21% more likely to find you a buyer. 2 in 10 house listings, we will sell better than the average estate. That's a powerful stat, and everyone will have their own version of it. And if you are a good agent, find that data, embrace it, use the kind of whichever point you want to point across. And then that's your winning kind of USP. Everyone does photos, floor plans, and videos these days. Not everyone can say that. So you got to
that's headline, and that is the type of thing that we always say as agents, you can't expect. If you're only seeing one, ideally everyone would like to see 2. It can prove quite difficult, but you can't expect to have a client remember your whole pitch, but you can expect them to remember that big headline stat when you have a conversation with their other half about which agent to choose.
I don't know if you've listened to the Daniel Priestley second one on Diary of a CEO yet, but he was talking about familiarity and kind of know, like, and trust with Stephen Bartlett, and he kind of highlighted the fact that the human brain can remember in familiarity kind of 1,500 people in their life, and then about only 100 which they can remember like ultimate familiarity, to the point if you both turned up at the same conference and you saw each other from across the way, you would kind of recognize. But what he was talking about is that's because you've had a period of hours of associating with them. Now, if you looked at like a George Clooney or Angelina Jolie, it's like a false familiarity. We think we know them because we've seen all of this stuff. And what we have to do is remember how the press kind of leverage the negative news because they have impacting stories that you remember. Whereas estate agents, we have the ability to kind of have the same impact with our target audience, to the way that they feel they know us, they trust us. We share the news, but it's because it's pinpoint headline stuff. And it doesn't have to be like the news in negative. It's pinpoint headline stuff, just simplicity, less waffle, just simplicity. And that is the difference of you being there in someone's brain and familiar to just a cold agent where someone Googles estate agents in my town, and
that's with any marketing, all the marketing that we talk about on this show. That's ultimately where we want to be, where the fee conversation is nowhere near as important as it is if they've just Googled you. So yeah, a massive thank you once again to Paul for joining us. A really insightful episode. If you have enjoyed, please share it out on social media. Reach out to Paul, Ian, or myself. I'm Mark Worrell. He's Ian Macbeth. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.